Welcome, and thank you for coming. Today, I will be sharing findings from my dissertation study on college students writing about literature. As an overview, I will briefly share the study context, frameworks guiding the study, and research questions and methods. I will then discuss the findings and contributions. In my dissertation, I strive to render explicit the ways writing expectations may be largely tacit for students. Student writers are expected to interpret the complexities and nuances of literary texts, yet might struggle with interpreting texts in ways that are academically valued in writing studies. In discussing this pedagogical challenge and illuminating a hidden gap in the scholarship on college-level literary interpretive writing, I illustrate that attending students' language choices can make visible abstract disciplinary writing expectations that literary scholars and instructors value in literary interpretation, including nuance, which I conceptualize as an awareness of the possible layers and shades of significance in literary text. I investigate nuanced meanings in students' language choices by drawing on Michael Halliday's theory of systemic functional linguistics, which offers a means by which to more systemically and systematically recognize degrees of nuance in students' writing. The appraisal framework encompasses resources of attitude, our student writers' evaluations of a text, which include affect, the way students describe what characters feel, judgment, the way students describe characters' moral judgments and behaviors, and appreciation, the way students interpret literary significance. Engagement, including the way students expand and contract dialogic space for alternative perspectives, and graduation, the ways students intensify and soften the strength of an interpretation. My research questions are: 1, in what ways do students' language choices realize literary interpretive moves? 2, in what ways do the linguistic patterns associated with appraisal in students' writing correlate with the meanings realized in literary interpretation that instructors value in students' writing? And 3, what pedagogical implications can we draw from the analysis of student writing samples, course materials, and conversations with instructors? I focus on students writing in English 124, Academic Writing and Literature, a first-year writing course focused on writing in response to literature, and English 298, Literary Studies, a course that introduces students to the discipline of literary studies. In my study, I cross-analyze students' writing samples, instructor interviews, and course materials to examine how students' language choices do or do not correspond to instructors' expectations for writing. In addressing the first research question, in what ways do students' language choices realize literary interpretive moves based on the analysis of appraisal resources and essay prompts, I found that students summarize literary texts by describing the emotions characters feel using affect and by describing characters' ethical and moral attitudes using judgment. Meanwhile, students interpret the significance of a literary work or an author's craft using appreciation. A subset of the students who interpret texts unearth the multiple possible layers and shades of significance. I conceptualize these multi-layered interpretations as central to my conception of nuance. This analysis reveals a distinction between students writing that relates what happens in a text, the surface-level actions or behaviors, and students writing that delves into the underlying layers of signification, illustrating how and why they read a particular work in a particular way. These observations indicate that supporting students who progress beyond summary to interpret texts becomes crucial to cultivating their abilities in literary critical writing. This is one excerpt from a student's essay from the upper-level class English 298. It is known from the beginning of the creature's existence that he wishes for companionship and love, and yet many times he is cast out by humanity. The first time was when his own creator, Victor Frankenstein, abandoned him out of fear. He tries once more with the DeLacy family, taking a more strategic approach and gaining the sympathies of the blind elder DeLacy man. However, he was much more cast aside, and his hatred for humanity begins to blossom as the creature says, quote, "From that moment, I declared everlasting war against the species." In this paragraph, the student describes the way the creature yearns for human companionship, yet is cast out by humanities, leading the creature to develop a hatred for humanity. A linguistic analysis of the essay reveals that the student summarizes a creature's longing for companionship and love using affect. The student also conveys a positive judgment of the creature's cleverness in taking a more strategic approach and gaining the sympathies of the blind elderly seaman. The student summarizes the literary text by describing characters' feelings, motivations, and behaviors. Yet in the text of literary interpretation, students are expected not merely to summarize what happens in the text, but to attend closely to the intricacies of literary language and to relate specific elements with broader themes and significances. In supporting students to cross the threshold from summary into interpretation, instructors can encourage students to move beyond describing characters' feelings and behaviors using affect and judgment toward unearthing intricate significances using appreciation. This is an excerpt from an English 124 student's essay below. Decker introduces scene 10 by using ambiguous adjectives to showcase the interesting power dynamic between Marjorie and the shoemakers. The passage begins with Marjorie addressing Hodge, saying he is too fast for her. At first glance, the word appears to be a synonym for rapid or quick. Perhaps Hodge physically moves too quickly, making it difficult for Marjorie to interact with him. In another sense, it could mean that he is too impulsive or inattentive to listen to her. However, fast can also carry another meaning. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word fast can mean firm or not easily turned aside, constant, firm, steadfast. The seemingly simple word reveals both the complexity of the relationship between Marjorie and the other shoemakers. In this paragraph, the student interprets the way the ambiguous adjectives in the play reveal insights into the relationship and power dynamic among the characters. The student considers the possible meanings of the word fast, which range from more apparent to relatively hidden or latent layers of signification. As the student observes, at first glance, the word appears to mean rapid or quick and could refer to the way Hodge is impulsive or inattentive. The student then illuminates an alternative possible meaning of fast as not easily turned aside, constant, firm, steadfast. A linguistic analysis of the paragraph reveals that the student introduces the interpretation by integrating literary metalanguage or appreciation coded in orange. By employing the word ambiguous, the student signals the multiple, perhaps conflicting layers of meaning that emerge from the literary language. Meanwhile, by integrating the words showcase and interesting, the student indicates the intricate richness of meaning that emerges from the literary work. The student teases apart the possible significances of literary language using engagement expressions that expand the dialogic space, attuning to the subtle shades of literary language. In addition, the student signals an additional layer of meaning by employing the graduation resource also, and signals the competing or contradictory layers of meaning by employing the engagement resource, however. By interweaving attitude, engagement, and graduation resources, the student unpacks the multiple possibilities of literary language while simultaneously signaling an openness to alternative possible interpretation. A distinction emerges between students writing in English 124 and English 298. While the English 124 essays demonstrate a relatively greater emphasis on the interpretation of specific words, images, and other literary elements, the English 298 essays display a relatively greater emphasis on the characters and themes. Such a distinction illustrates the focus in English 124 on offering students practice with the skill of literary close reading and the process of interpreting literary language, as juxtaposed with a relative emphasis in English 298 on applying close reading as a scaffold toward broader interpretations of characterization and thematic development. While I acknowledge the role that the assignment guidelines play in shaping students' responses, I likewise illustrate the value of the linguistic analysis. Students in English 298 more frequently convey abstract themes using condensed noun phrases in their essays, e.g. the use of biblical themes, which carries implications for supporting students to construct interpretations of thematic significance through an attention to students' language choices in writing. In addressing research question 2, in what ways do the linguistic patterns associated with appraisal and students' writing correlate with the meanings realized in literary interpretation that instructors value in students' writing, based on the cross-analysis of writing samples, course materials, and conversations with instructors? I found that a cross-examination of student writing samples, course materials, and instructor interviews shows that the abstract qualities instructors value can be identified in students' language choices. What an instructor describes as ambiguous and multiple meanings can be identified as instances in which students interpret the multiple meanings of literary language using appreciation resources that interpret literary significances alongside engagement resources that expand the dialogic space. Yet abstract qualities such as multiplicity and ambiguity may elude students' understanding, raising the need for more accessible ways of describing literary interpretation. In addressing research question 3, what pedagogical implications can we draw from the analysis of writing samples, course materials, and conversations with instructors? I find that attending to language can support students with crafting more nuanced literary interpretations. I suggest that instructors can encourage students to consider the ways writers' rhetorical strategies create valued meanings. By reviewing examples of summary alongside examples of interpretation, instructors can support students with recognizing the way summaries and interpretations are constructed in writing. For instance, in the ways students describe characters' feelings and moral behaviors and judgments, or interpret the possible significances of literary language. Such a linguistic attention to writing could help students understand what constitutes summary and interpretation. An explicit understanding of the ways language creates literary specific meanings can support pedagogy in concrete ways. While conducting a review of model essays, instructors can immerse students in examining the language choices that realize literary interpretive moves. For instance, in scaffolding literary interpretive writing, instructors could elucidate to students the ways writers signal and develop interpretations of literary significance, e.g., the seemingly simple word reveals the complexity of the relationship among the characters. Instructors can also prompt students to identify instances where a writer unpacks the connotative intricacies of literary language using expressions that expand the dialogic space. E.g., this word could mean, or however, the word could also carry another meaning. A linguistic analysis and understanding of writing can offer students new insights into the ways interpretive meanings can be constructed and language choices that value those meanings, that realize those meanings in ways that instructors value. So this study contributes an innovative framework that illuminates students' writing through a linguistic lens, a systematic approach to highlighting what students need to understand about how literary interpretation is achieved, and reinterpreting literary scholar instructors' interpretations and expectations for students' writing in linguistic terms that relate to the instantiation of literary interpretation in students' essays. This study offers a new perspective of writing that can guide literary and writing pedagogy. A linguistic attention to writing can raise students' and instructors' consciousness of the way language works to create valued meanings in writing. By precisely pinpointing the ways literary interpretive moves are realized in language, the analysis elucidates the ways interpretation can be modeled for students through an attention to the ways language choices shape the meanings. In turn, a metalinguistic awareness of writing can sharpen students and instructors' abilities to recognize and describe what constitutes a nuanced, multi-layered interpretation of literature. In elucidating the ways nuanced interpretations, as conceptualized by instructors, are construed in writing, the findings render explicit the often impressionistic descriptors of literary interpretation, creating pathways toward more concrete, accessible approaches to teaching writing. We often conceive of the language of literature as complex, subtle, and multifaceted, yet the study exposes the intricacies of students' own writing. In this study, I'd seek to illuminate the intricacies of language and meaning, the rhythms of composition, the oscillation of language and its melodic harmonizations. To study students' writing is to listen to the cadences of language and its continual unfolding, to register the slightest shades of tone and texture, to intimate the infinitesimal intricacies of implication and the rises and falls of the consciousness, and the ebb and flow of the spirit as it traverses surfaces and depth. Thank you for listening, and I am happy to take questions.